Hello, welcome everybody. I am Emma Lowe. Thank you for joining me for this hump day, Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday morning, wherever you are, with the two awesome friends I have, GTM expert, Mar and Liz. And today we're going to tackle, I would say, a question that we always have, like CS and sales alignment and how to fuel growth. Mar and Liz, you want to introduce yourself to the audience here?
Sure. I guess I'll start. Hello, everybody. I'm Mar Brandt. I am the Chief Sales Officer of ARC XP. It's very new, 13 days in, but longtime revenue leader in B2B SaaS, primarily MarTech, running teams of all sizes, of different capital models, from public to VC funded to PE. So, yeah, excited for this chat. Thank you, Emma, for hosting.
Yeah. And hi, everyone. I'm Liz Harrell. So I'm the founder of Sell Success, which is a more recent fun venture, taking a lot of experience from wearing all of the hats in high growth startups. I consider basically growing companies to be my life's work. So I'm super excited to be here, ready to chat a lot about the trends that we're seeing in go-to-market, and different ways to think about aligning your teams, lending your customer journey to accelerate growth.
Thank you. I'm here representing CSM Focus, and the number one question I always get asked is, should CS own upsell and expansion? We kind of talked about this before our show. What do you guys think? I know.
Drop the hot one fast, right?
I know. I gotta shoot that in.
I'm going to yield to Liz on her very on this topic, and then we can move from there.
Really good question.
Get up,
I think there's two things. So first off, like a lot of folks probably on the call, the most important thing when it comes to accelerating revenue is really around customer value. And the question I find in aligning, marketing, CS, sales, product, all of the teams is what changes for your customer when they work with your company? And so that's that value question. I personally believe that there's a lot of different ways that you can help sell value to customers and expand the value in what they can do in working with your team. And that is a team, if you're services, if you're a product, if you're product plus services, whatever that offering looks like, I think is a really important determinant of who should do what when it comes to accelerating growth and expansion with your customer base. So I've definitely had teams where the CSM is far and away the best person to accelerate growth with customers. And it's because their core job function is to understand if somebody has committed to working with your company, whether it's that first land or that most recent renewal, or in some cases where you have to win the business every month. You might be a payments business or usage based, right? Where tomorrow is absolutely promised to no one. Somebody can switch that usage over any day, right? Having clear understanding of what the customer expectations are, how they're measuring their ROI, how they're measuring their value, how they're measuring their impact, and then making sure that you're both hitting those expectations and providing a path to deliver more value, moving the goalpost through each renewal, each expansion, each opportunity, each conversation. That's really what determines the actual acceleration for revenue expansion, upsell, whatever that looks like, right? Being able to basically get the opportunity to deliver more value to your customer and ask for more as well, which is the revenue component, right? You get paid when you do. So,
yeah, I would add blurring the lines across roles. I think it's a great point to look at it from the customer's experience and POV, right? Am I getting value? Am I extracting that value easily? Do the teams that interact with me have credibility? Do they know, are they technically sound and experienced so that the value extraction for me and my teams are easy? On the flip side, when you think about that as a software vendor or provider, again, trying to blur the lines in terms of which role is responsible for what, I think you need to look at it in terms of not just the customer. Yes, absolutely. First and foremost, the customer's experience and what value they're gaining from your brand, but how are you efficiently, right, running your business operations and running it with sound metrics, right, from revenue to margins, and when it comes to retention and growth, protection of GRR and ensuring of NRR. These are all the more traditional, I think, parameters that we should be looking at. Again, blurring the lines on who does what. How do we ensure that our business is healthy while we're serving the customer's needs?
Yeah, and that's one of that. It's all about, right? Like, do you have a clear sense of your metrics? Are you benchmarking a lot of pieces around your NRR, your GRR, right? And then if your metrics are below a typical benchmark, maybe you need to do something different. And oftentimes that alignment when it comes to what's the fastest way to that growth path to expanding, and then of course, like retaining the dollars that you do have. If you've got problems anywhere in that funnel, maybe you do need CSMs to focus more on risk mitigation and have AMs or AEs that can have more of those sales opportunities. One of my favorite analogies is like a pond, right? And so maybe it's a pond with a lot of lily pads, and frog's got to get off and swim to another business unit or geo, or kind of like completely different use case than the one that you're currently solving if you have a complex multi-product platform or something like that. So oftentimes it really just depends on how can you make that motion easier for your customer to see more value in working with you and to do more with your team. And if the notion is that you're going to need a lot more resources to do that, then kind of determining who those resources are and what skills they need to effectively drive that expansion.
At the beginning, I forgot to ask you guys, what type of, because I feel like CS is always about, it depends on everything, and what deal stage or the company size you're experiencing, and what kind of, do you mind explaining where your background is, like what just the biggest pitfall that you see in that deal size or company stage?
Yeah, so I've done sales and CS across, so my expertise is definitely startups and scale-ups, typically below $100 million of ARR, and trying to scale from, 10 to 100, 1 to 10, some of those pieces. And then I think have ranged, the biggest renewal I've ever signed was worth $100 million. And the smallest one was probably about 1,000. So lots of different segments I've played in, from the incredibly high touch, where essentially we had a P&L for every single customer. That was when I was at Marqeta, to the low touch, tech touch type segments as well. So pretty broad ranging experience to speak from there.
Yeah, and mine is more late stage. I would say 100 million and up typically in terms of ARR. But what's funny and sometimes ironic about B2B SaaS is that you can have an ARR that looks late stage, but your organizational maturity is actually more early stage, right? I like to say I go into teams where ARR is more Series D or Series C, and then I look at the team and the build opportunity and sort of the maturity model, and they're like Series B. Right? People showing up as individuals that don't really have a system or infrastructure in place to scale, right? And, oftentimes we see that because there's been growth at all costs with B2B SaaS. There's a lot of focus on market share versus, what we now consider to be smart management, smart capital management, more focused growth, profitable growth. So yeah, you'll see a lot of disconnects between size of ARR and then actual team maturity. But I think that's what's exciting about this space. Did I answer the question?
Yep. It's it doesn't matter. It's I guess where you come from is always come to the maturity, and there's always a process, not a problem, a challenge that we see across. Yeah. I guess earlier today, I want to ask is, well, okay, we came back up a little bit. We came together because IFTA actually released that 2025 benchmark report. And one thing it was talking about how how most of the revenue, 50% actually come from expansion. That's why I want to ask, like, where do you see this going and this continuing, and how can we double down on that? Just thinking about scaling. And sales to CS handoff is one of the friction point. There's only one, but how do you see it? Just on that part, scale growth. Huh.
Yeah. Well, I think it probably comes as no surprise that expansion's becoming such an important part of doubling down on existing customers. Although I think one thing that's really interesting, and I'll kind of use a case study. When I was at Mode, eventually about 65% of our revenue, and just like total gross expansion, sort of like new revenue dollars, was coming from our existing customer business. And I think that I tend to see the most important thing that really drives that is a really tight alignment on your ICP. I tend to think a lot of things related to expansion on both land and expand come down to really good segmentation and really defining those customer segments and then creating some form of momentum where you're constantly delivering above the line value, right? And so that means that you want to be able to say exactly what it is, the value someone will have when working with your product, with your platform, with your team, deliver above, exceed expectations quickly, and that's what activates that momentum where people are like, goodness gracious, we started using Mode for this one use case, started using Mode for this. We signed up with 10 seats. And if you can get that first land within 90 days, what we found, typically we could drive a lot of that momentum into really quickly almost going viral within an organization. And we were very seat based. And so that core kind of activation piece was really important. And so when I hear terms like handoffs or friction or things like that, one of the most important things, which I think is a huge opportunity today with AI, especially for being able to do deep research on your customers, is ultimately what the customer cares the most about in that momentum cycle is, are they speaking to somebody who's adding value and can be an expert? Whether that's your CS team, a solutions engineer, a salesperson, an AM, doesn't necessarily matter who is interfacing with the customer, but the customer should have an expectation that whoever they're interfacing with can be an expert on their business. And so when it comes to really accelerating that motion, that means that your information is really clear and constantly kind of set up to hand off through your different systems, your CRM, et cetera, and you have a high expectation for whoever is interfacing with the customer. They're coming in prepared as a customer expert. Yes, product expertise is certainly something, and I think it can accelerate if you're really documenting your product. People can answer a lot of questions and deliver that value to customers live at every step of the journey where your people and teams are truly value added. But I think that's the thing that typically misses. Customers don't ever want to repeat themselves through your sales process or your CS process or switch hands to 20 different people who don't know anything about their business. They want to speak to people who understand their business. And so that's, I think, the most important thing when accelerating is driving that expertise and then understanding what drives the customers, what are their goals, what are their outcomes they expect, and then making sure that whoever's interfacing with them can actually speak to that. So sorry, I'm a little long-winded.
I think just, maybe speaking to the, majority of sales is coming from existing customers. I think that makes a lot of natural sense, right? It's easier to sell into an existing customer base. It's lower CAC. It's more efficient to do that. New logos are much more difficult. The sales cycles, especially in enterprise, significantly longer than an existing account upsell or expansion opportunity. I think if you're thinking about operationalizing expansion, I think some of the things, assuming you've done the analysis and you know that you have enough runway to build an expansion team, I think analysis around white space is a really important discipline to adopt, right? Here's my customer base. What don't I have share of wallet in? What's my opportunity to upsell based on, my add-on products or additional products? Where is my runway on existing accounts to grow the revenue? And then I think once you've done that, you map the accounts. You can score the accounts based on that white space opportunity, align your organizational structure around that, and design an engagement and ROE process. This is a very simplistic way to say, here's how I would, stand up an expansion or customer sales organization. But I think white space analysis is really important to really identify, like, what am I going to go after? And what is my real, account, customer sales, revenue potential? And I think everything that Lizz says is extremely valid around in terms of value, and value realization, and making sure that those roles are really focused on customer value at the same time that they're trying to roadmap what those incremental revenue opportunities are.
We mentioned like the customer value perceived value. How do you map that yourself? Like, how do we know? I feel like a lot of people can't really pin down what value is.
Well, you always ask. That's probably the first is, and that's the heart, right? That's if you're a customer, I mean, think about that experience, right? And that's when we hear, like, oftentimes people are like, well, there's friction. If you're a customer who's 6 months into an engagement and you've worked with, 4 or 5 people at a company and someone's asking that question, that can be incredibly frustrating, right? So I think there's education in the sales process, right? And that's always been the question, like, what do we expect to change when someone works with your product, with your platform, with your team? And so you educate them about what's possible, right? The art of the possible. And then you deliver, right? You tell, hey, this is the time frame it's going to take for you to go from point A to point B. Here's where you're going. Here's how we're going to help you get there, right? And then you make sure when you do, you celebrate, right? And so I think that's the key thing. There's the education of, like, where you're helping a customer go. There's the clear roadmap of how you're going to help them get there, including different milestones that are either binary, like it's done or not done. And there's a measurement of that sort of like expectation of what the outcome is that they're going to achieve at each stage. And then you make sure it's clearly measured for there's a timeline, that an expectation to get there. And when you do, that's when you can look back and say, here's what we promised, here's where we've been, and here's where you've gotten to in what we did, the timeline that we promised, right? And I think that's part documentation, it's part asking the right questions, it's part making sure you have the right people in the right seats doing the right things, and that your product is doing some of that too, right? Like, not everybody wants to jump on the phone with people every, week or every other week, et cetera. And so oftentimes as you design that journey, you want to make sure it's becoming really clear. And that's the reinforcement loop, right? When you have customers that you've gotten there, then you megaphone that voice, right? And you make sure that every single person that is customer facing understands what that journey is like. And that's what you're selling again. So,
yeah, I think at the very fundamental level, your product is solving a business problem, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be in business. So everyone in the organization needs to be really aligned with what that solution is that we're solving for our customers, for our addressable market. And then, I think the tip of the spear is your sales organization, your marketing organization, right? If you ask Sam Jacobs, right, it's product and marketing, right, that creates the awareness and the demand. And then your selling organization, I'll include CS in that, converts on that demand, right? But at the very fundamental level, what is the business problem that we're trying to solve? And then the inverse of that is the experience that your customer gets from solving that problem through your product. That's the value. And it's nuanced, right? Because these relationships are long-term, ideally. They renew, for additional terms. So I think the trick is, as your business evolves and your product evolves, is it still answering the business problems?
we talk about, I know this is about GTM alignment, and you talk about, are we still solving the right business? What other area of opportunity you think maybe it's not just CS and sales alignment, or you think that every company or founder or C-suite should ask if there's some that we're missing out on opportunity? I don't know. Did you address this? Okay, I actually have another question I wanted to ask. Like, if you, Liz, you want to say something or?
Yeah, no, I'm just listening. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You mentioned about like the right skill or right people in the seat that during the sales cycle or the customer journey or buyer journey, right? There's a trend that's coming up I call full cycle selling that's come back, and I want to get your opinion about it. You asked me about what is the report. It's like 46% of the SaaS and tech company are returning to that model based on the benchmark. And what do you think about that? Is in your opinion about pros and cons? Should we think about this more since we're talking about silo and alignment here?
I mean, I have some thoughts around that. I think it depends on the complexity of the business, the complexity of the product, the complexity of that customer journey. I think maybe some of this, and I don't know if the research shows this, maybe some of this is in response to artificial intelligence and the efficiency, right? The promise of efficiency that AI brings to the go-to-market motions. And there's a lot of discussion around that. But maybe putting that aside for a second, if you're asking sellers to do both new logo and cross-sell upsell, I think you have to ask yourself, how complex are those two dimensions in their role, right? If you're selling a 12-month sales cycle and you want those guys to also renew and upsell, I think you got to double tap on that model a little bit. The generalist model is very efficient, I think, in earlier stage or, more or less complex, technologies. We can talk about that. But I think once you get into enterprise, or even once you start saying, I'm developing additional functionality and additional products, you have multiple SKUs, I think you have to think more about specialization based on that complexity. Liz, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a jobs to be done framework, right? That's a really important one. And so I'm a big fan of like mission, mindset, skill sets is sort of the framework I use when structuring any role. And so if the mission say, hey, I think the pro of a full cycle is your job is to really deeply understand this patch of whatever ICP segment that you have somebody owning. Is it a list of accounts? Is it a list of accounts by region, or a list of accounts by vertical, or a list of, right? I think the knowledge of the customer is a really nice one where someone knows exactly what they're interfacing with, and that person's sticking with you through full cycle. On the flip side, right, when it comes to the specialization of the jobs to be done framework, like the customer's needs do typically evolve over time. And now you're kind of talking about trying to find unicorn candidates that can essentially like play a lot of the different roles, almost like, conduct the orchestra at different stages of the customer journey, which can be a little bit harder as well. Um, so I've seen, if there's one thing that is commonly true, I think there is never a right or wrong answer when it comes to how you structure your go-to-market motion. I've seen a ton of them be successful. And then I've seen a ton of folks try to take what's been successful at one company, overlay it at a different company, and then see it fail. And I think the key thing is making sure that what you're trying to track and measure, from your operating metrics to your customer journey metrics, is really clear. And then determining what type of resources are the best resources to interface with customers at different stages of the journey is the thing just to kind of decide to figure out.
Another interesting, I think you talk about using AI a lot. And so also see the question is no longer should we use AI, is like how deeply we're integrating using the efficiency or to scale that AI? What's your thought about this? Are you going to introduce AI? How early it is, or what's your thought about this?
So I know Liz is incredibly passionate about AI. So I'm going to take the foundational route to the answer here, and then I'm going to give her the floor so she can wax poetic about artificial intelligence. But I think when I think about AI, so there's a lot of solutions to repeatability and efficiency in the tactical nature of doing the selling work that I think AI really answers very well today, right? From everything from like just the simplistic technology of AI note takers, right? Like who wouldn't appreciate having your action items from every call automatically served to you so you can move faster to the next step in the sales process, to things like revenue analytics platforms like Gong, which started out really as a transcription tool for Zoom meetings, right? And now they're doing forecasting analysis and capabilities. Actually, ARC uses them for forecasting, much to my surprise. And so I'm actually really excited to look at this new sort of evolution of Gong that's really leaning on artificial intelligence in many, many ways, to even things like top of funnel tools like Clay. So I think from like a day-to-day blocking and tackling perspective in the revenue organization, there's a tremendous amount of value. This is where I'm going to stop and give the floor to Liz, because I know this is a favorite topic of hers.
Yeah, I love this topic. So I'll talk about two things. I think the first, and this is, there's tons of different ways you can add AI in just to take on like automation, right? And so I think the core automation effects, whether it's with, your traditional agentic AI and your support functionality to help people find information, answers to questions, to I love like the note takers, how that transitions and puts information in CRM, automatically moves stages, lots of great stuff in automation. I am most excited about the potential for AI to help people think more strategically and accelerate strategic thinking. Because what you find these days is the people who are leveraging AI to like probably like the most efficiency gains, it's not because they're just like feeding in stuff and then taking raw outputs and then using those. They know how to ask the right questions. They create complicated prompts that essentially like kind of download portions of their thinking. And so they take in a lot of the inputs. It is much faster to take in tons of different inputs. You can scrape data. You can take in, again, the qualitative information coming from customer calls. You can take in information coming from filings or publicly available information on customers as well. Just tons of things that you can pull in as inputs. And then the ability to ask questions and create prompts in different ways to think about parsing out those inputs into really, really strategic outputs. And so I think one of the terms I use, sort of like the AI operating system, is how can you essentially like use AI and structure things uniquely for your job function or your specific projects or the types of goals that you have, maybe quarter in, day out, day in, day out, and use AI to accelerate your ability to accomplish higher impact work at a basically like maintaining a quality bar using less time. That's where I get most excited. The implementations that I've seen that are probably the highest impact are really around taking a lot of the things that make us human, our experience and perspective, and our ability to think strategically, because people like Mar with like decades of that have seen a lot of this stuff from the ground up at levels of scale and maturity can essentially like take in information much faster and do something with it more strategically at a higher impact. So
I love that. I think it's much needed. And it really takes it to the next level, right?
yeah, it's amazing that what you can parse from just like raw qualitative it's just remarkable how much quickly, but you can't just take a raw output from it. You can ask the questions of raw data and you ask just basic questions, you're going to get basic answers, right? There's no alpha there. There's nothing that's like strategically that nobody else could do. But you can accelerate a lot of that ability to like leverage the strategic thinking in your teams and your people, your managers, your leaders, your experts. And I think that's when we see stories of people getting to large numbers of ARR with smaller teams, That's what they're doing, right? Is they're taking people with like a really incredible amount of expertise and perspective and accelerating that through AI.
I want to ask you, do you think we'll solve the silos? Just kidding. Yeah, I know we're kind of up to our time right now. Mer and Liz, I want to ask one question. If there's one takeaway for the audience to think about today about sales and CS alignment and how to fuel growth, what's that one takeaway like to leave for the audience?
I mean, you know, where my mind goes is really to Liz's point around putting the customer at the center, right? And not jumping to conclusions about roles and responsibilities, but really mapping out that journey on both sides, right? How does your customer experience your product and experience value from your solution? And then how do you, on your side, experience growth and the right business metrics by solving for that value realization for your customer?
Yeah, I'd second that. I'd say like first, just don't assume there are silos, right? Assume it is like one team, one dream, one journey. And that means that what you'll do is you'll focus on who is the right customer, and there's probably segments, right? What is our promise? What is the value that we are promising them? And again, that could be by different products, but what's the value? What is the outcome? How are we measuring that? And then start someone map your operating metrics by the funnel. Like, how do you actually like what needs to happen in each stage of the journey to get to that? You know, what is a lead? How do we convert it to a customer? How do we make sure that customer is getting to like that value realization? And then how do we expand? How do we renew? Like, make sure that is measured and everyone has a clear definition about, again, not by silo, not who owns what piece, but a clear funnel. And then make sure the operating metrics, right? Like, how are you educating them at the very beginning? What is the value that you're adding through each stage of the process from the customer's lens? And then you can start figuring out, okay, if everyone is aligned in your organization on what that looks like, then you can start figuring out who does what and when and how. So
that's great. One is putting customer in the center. One is really, we're a team.
Yeah.
There's no silo. Stop putting assumption first. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Mer and Liz. What's the best way to contact you if you need other questions?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Probably, yeah.
All right.
Happy to chat more.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you again, and contact Mar and Liz on LinkedIn. Thanks again.
Thanks so much for hosting, Emma. It was good to see you, Mar.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Excellent.
Bye, ladies.
Bye, y'all. Take